I never know where it's going to go.
I get to see my whole book.
There you go. Right back there. All right. Hi guys, come on in. Come on in. Let's get ready to roll. So I've got a very special guest with me. I think Chris, you've been on with me a couple times, right?
A couple of times in the past, yeah, and it's always been great.
All right, this is my mentor, Chris Adamo, who wrote the book back here. Okay, let me get it and show it to you guys. Wait. Okay, here we go. You gotta get this. Rules for Defeating Radicals. I use this as a desk reference for handling radicals, right, Chris? And we've got a lot of radicals. It seems
we're surrounded by them. Yeah, I mean that is the mainstream of the Democrat Party anymore, and sadly, we're finding out more and more that I put a chapter in there about rhinos, that they're right in there with the Democrats.
Enablers.
So they are absolutely enabled, absolutely deliberate. They just know that they can inflict more harm on our cause as conservatives from within, and so they claim to be Republicans.
Correct. Yeah, but they're anything but. In fact, I think you and I have talked about this often. The greatest threat to democracy are rhinos.
Yep, they're the biggest obstacle. I always use the analogy of the Trojan horse, which, whether it's real or mythology, you look at the lesson there that the entire Greek army couldn't accomplish what a handful of guys were able to do when they got within the camp of the Trojans and were able to undermine it from within. And that's the principle we see with the rhinos, which is why the louder we hear from these people that they're good Republicans, and if we ignore their track records, the more we open ourselves up to attacks from within.
Well, you come from Wyoming, where one of the biggest rhino is Liz Cheney. I come from North Carolina, and we've got a guy who's right on her trail, and that would be Tom Tillis, who loves to restrict gun rights and everything the left is for, he's for. And it's absolutely maddening. Nothing makes people more angry than when they have given trust to someone and they not only erode the trust, but they kind of spit in their face, metaphorically speaking, right?
They do that, and then they claim to be the real Republicans. And again, as we've seen from Liz Cheney, where if you listen to her, and I could go on for hours, don't let me wander off down a rabbit trail here, but there's a whole organization in Wyoming called the Frontier Republicans, and they're a bunch of Liz Cheneys. And they're just out there to undermine conservatives.
Yeah, the Lincoln Project then.
Absolutely in the same league with the Lincoln Project.
Oh, perfect. We just need a lot more of those organizations. So we're going to talk about, because parents, grandparents, folks on the ground, they have tuned in tonight. They want to know, and they really want to know how to fight back against this lunacy. So we're going to have 5, I don't know if we call it rules, right? But principles about what's going on. So let me outlay this story for you, Chris, that we reported yesterday. Okay. Pitt County happens to be in the eastern part of North Carolina. It's by the coast. You would know East Carolina, Greenville, places like that. Well, Pitt County principal wants to ask elementary kids about their sexuality. So you might think, wow, so that's hyperbole. Wants to ask, well, whatever do you mean? Well, this is her. Actually, you can see right here. I want to see if I can zoom in on this. This is the principal, or the principal, the vice principal, and the guidance counselor. And the principal, Chris, is so enthusiastic about this training. She wants the world to know how wonderful this is, because get this, they're going to ask children about their status: gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex, non-binary, and something I don't even know, two-spirit.
What's that last one?
Two-spirit.
Oh boy.
But check this out. Here's the purpose of the training, according to the website of East Carolina. That's who puts this training on. Get this: Safe Zone Training K through 12 is an opportunity for those in the education fields to talk, learn, ask questions about sexuality and gender, so they can take it back into the classroom, ask questions about, etc. So in other words, they're learning how to be able to take questioning and opening up questioning into the classroom of elementary school kids. So we're taking the radicalism, Chris, from the universities, which we know is positively out of control, and we are piping that in, not to the high schools, not to the middle school, to the elementary school.
Hey, let's put things back in perspective now. Not too long ago, if some adult was to go up to a kid on the street and start talking to him about these things, and the kid mentioned this to their parents that it had happened, that person we first of all hauled off to jail as a predator. And secondly, they'd be rightfully forced to register as a sex offender from that point going forward. Okay, these people are doing the very same thing. And the fact that they have credentials that say they can do this in the classroom, the fact it's being done under taxpayer dollars, those are not legitimizing factors. Those are greater outrages against the people, the parents, whose kids are being subjected to molestation, nothing short of molestation, whether it's verbal, obviously leading to physical. The goal is to corrupt those children with this stuff. And it's truly evil. It's an attack on these children. And the biggest thing that our side does wrong is to not characterize it as such. We disagree with it. We don't think it's appropriate in the classroom. I'd rather they were learning math and English. Those are secondary subjects. Those play down the real evil of what's going on here, the real evil that needs to be dealt with as such.
So we have ding, ding, rule or principle number 1. Okay. You can see it printed up here, guys. The rule number 1 is what? Don't minimize this, right? Don't minimize what we're living in. The left is hostile to protecting the innocence of children. And as you pointed out, this is not the America that we know. It didn't used to be that way. And who's to blame? The left. And don't you ever let the left forget that.
Yeah, it has to go back to that. But I'll show you how they are able to escape culpability. Just a couple of things we saw there, and I jotted down real fast. First of all, if you look at that picture, there's a flag in the background that says love wins. Okay.
Let's look at that, guys. There you go.
Love wins. This isn't about child molesting. This is about loving these children. All of a sudden, these leftist counterculture monsters, and I'll call them monsters, there's nothing better than that. All of a sudden, they're on the moral high ground because they're talking about love. You know, even the word pedophile was a fairly recent term. They don't use the word child molester anymore. It's a pedophile. It's a child lover. Okay. And if you scroll down to the article, right there, that pull quote, safe zone training. Okay. This is safe zone. This is where these kids are safe. They're safe to be what? Safe to be molested, safe to be coerced and humiliated with this perverse discussion that, frankly, most kids are reflexively, they're just inherently modest. They don't really want to go into all this. They don't want to rip off their clothes in front of each other. And yet all of these perverts have gotten into official positions, and suddenly they're pushing this on these kids. And what are the parents doing? Parents are going on the defensive. The number one tactic of the Alinsky strategy is to claim a moral high ground, and therefore your opposition feels like they have to oppose it from a defensive position. Once you do that, it's not a matter of who's going to win. It's a matter of how long it's going to take them. That's why we've got to go back to calling these things out for exactly what they are in our terms, not theirs. And we've got to stand on those truths, and we cannot grant them any latitude for anything supposedly reasonable, because what's going on here? Perversion and child molesting. There is no reasonable ground there, and we should never, ever allow them to gain any kind of a toehold in the conversation by claiming as much.
Okay, so they're going to claim the moral high ground, and if you take it to its basic element is what the opposite of love is what we're going to be accused of, right? And is hate.
Yep, we hate because we don't want kids engaging in illicit activities, being coerced by adults that shouldn't be in the presence of children if they promote this stuff. So yeah, we're the ones that are full of hate. What happened to kids back when this so-called hate that we advocate. What happened when it predominated? You didn't have teen pregnancy. You didn't have kids, little boys thinking that they want to take toxic chemicals into their bodies to become little girls. You didn't have suicides on the scale that you have nowadays. You didn't have any of that stuff, but they've classified it as hate. And unless we come back very bluntly and realign people with what's really going on here, we're fighting a defensive war.
Right. So the way that we are advocating, and you can tell me what you think of this idea, is we're advocating this to our candidates, our campaign surrogates, everybody who is out there and who is trying to save children, asking questions. So ask the question, how come it is that girls can't have their own public bathroom or changing facility anymore? How come that is?
That's
explain.
That's a basic right, a basic decency that a society that cares about vulnerability in its young people, in its young women, we would do that out of consideration for them. They deserve that. We take care of them because those things are private that they go through, and those things are something that we should protect. And in the same sense as with the sports, where you have these 6'5" male athletes trouncing these women in women's sports, in the same sense, but much more personally, to allow males to go into those bathrooms is a total betrayal and abandonment of the sensitivities of those little girls and young ladies.
Right. And so in this instance, you could frame a question and ask the principal, and believe me, you hadn't seen the last of this story, guys. We are just beginning, let me assure you. Asking the principal, so let me ask you this. How is teaching about homosexuality and learning to cultivate questions about that, how is that your business as a principal?
Right.
And they'll say something like, well, it's not our business. Well, you see, it's love. It's love for those students who need to come out and to be gay openly. And then I would point, this is just kind of me going down the logical, road here. Oh, okay. So homosexuality and gay children, they need to talk about that in school. I get it. I get what you're saying. And so that means that the rest of the students, they can talk about things like math, science, reading, and history. So I understand what you're saying now. To love the gay student is to not teach them, but to talk to them about perversion.
Yep. Boy, am I glad you went there with it, because yeah, the whole thing was pushed on us initially. Excuse me. You can tell I'm mad. Was pushed on us initially under the guise of tolerance. And tolerance is treated as the ultimate virtue. And I can give you extreme historical examples of where tolerance of evil was not a good thing. Tolerance of evil allowed innocent people to be harmed in great numbers. And again, we can go through all of history with that, but it's presented as a virtue. And our side comes back with, well, we don't want to be intolerant because that's mean, that's evil. Well, you know what? If I have to do something to be intolerant of sickos coming into the classroom, pushing this stuff on kids and doing literal, irreparable physical harm to these kids, I'm going to be intolerant of that.
Yeah. But, being intolerant means, and here's how we kind of communicate that, is being able to take a central word in their argument and bring it back and say, gosh, I agree. Nobody likes intolerance. And that's why we're standing up for the right for girls to be able to have their own bathroom, because I think it's wrong to be intolerant of girls. Wouldn't you agree?
Exactly. The tyranny of the minority there. And what you end up having in those situations, obviously, is for every poor little confused boy that doesn't really understand, because he's been fed such nonsense, he doesn't understand his sexuality as a male. For every one of those, you've got a dozen opportunists that are going, if I just stand here and look stupid, say stupid things, I can get in the girls' bathroom. And especially as some of the situations you pointed out in the past, I can get in there and get away with stuff that I couldn't get away with out in the open.
Well, we remember Klinger from MASH, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He's the original opportunist when it comes to trans. The guy, he dressed in women's clothing in order to get a ticket back to the U.S. when he was fighting in the Vietnam War, and it was just so funny because it never actually worked. Now it works almost too well. You can, as a boy, you can grab the handle of the bathroom and identify as a boy, go inside the threshold, identify as a girl, rape a girl, and then come out and say, well, I identify as a boy again. Then you have he said, she said going on in the bathroom, or she said, whatever, right? And it makes it very difficult. Leftists will tell you that it doesn't happen. It happens all the time. We have more cases than Justin Loudon. It happens all the time. So,
yeah, and the whole thing is fraught with confusion, and deliberately so. And again, until our side says we're not going to play by the rules that you guys dictate. And I understand your foray briefly into saying, about intolerance, but the truth is we are not going to accept their version of compassion for these kids, because we see these hideous things happening to these kids, and we recognize the lie that you guys are telling. And you know what? We're going to call it a lie. And we're not going to apologize for that. Point out my book again, just briefly. Rule number one in there. And if our side doesn't get this one right, the whole rest of it is moot because we lose. Rule number one is to never apologize unless you've actually done something wrong. And then you have to be very specific about what you're apologizing for, because if you say, okay, I said September 11th happened on a Wednesday, I'm sorry, it happened on a Tuesday. If you're not real specific about that, the only thing I did get wrong was the day of the week, but the event I described correctly, blah, blah. If you don't do it that way and be emphatic about what you're saying, they will take your apology and use that as a blanket to say, see, you admitted you were totally wrong. And from that point forward, you're on the defensive.
Yeah, never give them too much information. And that's another thing, and I know it's your rules, but our rules, when you're explaining yourself, you're losing. Okay. That's a rule.
Yep.
Look it up. When you're explaining, you're losing. It has to be, you've got to be okay not explaining things because I said so. It works in so many instances, and grown people, we have to get comfortable. I'm very comfortable saying it, but you guys, we need to get comfortable saying it. But why is it not okay to talk about sexuality? For me, I don't get into conversation, and I will say, because I said so. That's it.
I don't want my kids subjected to that. These other parents don't want their kids subjected. We don't want it. You work for us. You're not allowed to do that. Number one. Number two, there's a law out there against adults confronting children sexually, and it's laws against obscenity, laws against predatory behavior. And you know what? You keep this up, and we're going to pursue you on that basis. I'm going to give you rule number 2 real quickly, just to throw this in there.
I think we're on 3.
Okay, well, this one says never engage leftist leaders for the purpose of convincing them, which is pretty much the same thing you're saying right there. The thing that we fall into is if I give them all the facts, and if they're trying to be reasonable, they will see the logic of this and understand why I want to send my kids to school for the purpose of them getting educated, and we can find common ground there. And I'm sorry, that's futility. The minute you start doing that, you're on their turf, you lose. They already know that what they're doing is perverting the minds of these kids. They already know that these kids, they have all kinds of stats showing that these kids that undergo these hormone treatments, the suicides, the psychosis among these kids just goes right through the roof after they do that. They know that. They have an agenda. I don't need to convince them that their agenda is wrong. It's their agenda. They have an ulterior motive for it. And we don't have to spend our time, and we shouldn't spend our time trying to impress these people that we're reasonable and we just want what's good or whatever. We're telling them, no, we know what you're up to, and you're going to stop it, or we're going to stop you.
Well, the only exception I'll make to that, Chris, and I want you guys to understand this, when you are arguing with a leftist, it needs to be performative. Here's what I mean. It needs to be instructive for other people to show them how to fight and the folly of their argument. So it needs to be, on Twitter. I love doing this stuff where you're able to right? Humor them. Nothing makes them more angry than humor, and point that out. But we need the people that are capable of fighting, like you and I. We need to show people how it's done. Now, I don't waste my time on, as you and I say, ankle biter weirdos, because we've
Right,
got
but your goal here again is to show the third parties watching. And absolutely, I'm glad you clarified that. Absolutely, when you engage these leftists, you're showing the people in the middle who might start buying into this stuff, here's the facts. You're not doing it hoping that leftist is going to come around and see the light, because they already know. But you're using that situation as an opportunity for the others. You are absolutely right about that.
Right. It could be a showcase. So that you have to get in the ring every now and then, and you need to do it, by the way, at a time and place of your choosing. In other words, when you read my article and you say, oh gosh, I'm so mad, I'm going to go up there and scream at the school board, it may be appropriate. Find the right person who's responsible, right? In our articles, we'll always do the best to tell you that is, but it needs to be a time and place of your choosing, because when you make that, I'm saying metaphorically speaking, punch, right? When you make that strikeout, it's going to need to count. So you need to, get them talking. You get them talking, not the other way around, right, Chris?
Yeah, well, you maintain control of the situation. The spoiler alert on my book is you could sum it up in 3 words: stay the course. Okay, now though, you need the rest of the book to understand how to do that and how to avoid their little dirty tricks and pitfalls. But that's what it comes down to. You have a message, and the message is that you people are destroying the lives of these innocent kids. I'm, first of all, a parent, secondly, a taxpayer, third, a fellow citizen. I'm going to have to live with the results of what you people do. And I'm neither willing to pay for it nor to turn a blind eye while these poor kids are being totally exploited and abused this way. Okay, I'm going to go in there with this as my agenda. I'm not going to do it on terms that are going to try to make you feel good about what's going on, because I already know the leftist, your agenda is not to work with me or to do what these in the best interest of these kids.
I put up something. I had an interview with Sandy Smith, who's running in U.S. House District 1, which Pitt County is in. So this radical school is in. And someone on Twitter said, this isn't a left or right issue, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, look, when I'm interviewing a politician, it is a left or right issue. And I said, can you name me one Democrat who is standing up against this? You can't. So our job is to inform voters. This is exactly what we're going to do. Republicans say they're going to do something about it. So I'm willing to give them a chance, right?
Right. We try and we look for, but we need to look for results. I'd like to go back to that statement that the person made. This is not a left or right issue. The minute you see that, what you're looking at is a leftist who's trying to keep us from understanding where the battle lines need to be drawn. Okay. Now, in truth, you may have some Republicans on their side, but they're leftists also. I don't care if they put that R by their name. If you look at Liz Cheney, she was sitting in between Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi, talking about the Constitution and the rule of law. I mean, the hypocrisy there, the warped standard by which she was trying to push that is just beyond imagination. There was nothing Republican about that. And yet it is a left or right issue. And she was on the left, and these people you're describing, they're on the left.
Yeah. Bottom line, we have a superintendent you and I have talked about a couple times, Catherine Truitt. She's on the left, right? So yeah, I mean, we have to call it like we see it. So what's another way, another thing that we need to look out for and press on when we are fighting issues like the one that I just described?
Okay, well, one of the big things you've got to do is never accept the leftist definition of good and evil. And I'll go off course just briefly here to when you have Obamacare and the idea of repealing Obamacare. And it was the left is coming out and saying, if you do that, if you repeal Obamacare, here's what you're going to have for the consequences. All these millions of people are going to be denied medical care, right? We had people just dropping in the streets by the millions before Obamacare because they weren't getting medical care.
That's right.
And they assign these things, you're going to have all of these kids. If you don't allow us, safe space, love wins garbage for these kids.
Oh,
All of these kids are
they're
going
going
to
to
be
kill
hurting themselves.
Right, right. That's what they say, guys, is that they're always going to cite this as a school safety issue,
Yeah.
and that they will kill themselves. And then I got a good one for this, not to interrupt, but you say, yeah, you know, the incidence of transgender kids trying to kill themselves is very high, which is why it's a huge risk, and we should caution against this stuff and not encourage it.
Especially when it's irreversible, some of the things that happen. I saw a picture of probably about I'm going to guess an 11-year-old girl, and it was on Twitter or Facebook somewhere, and it was verged on being porn. It's a little topless 11-year-old girl who had her breasts removed. And she's going to wake up someday and realize that she got stampeded into this, and it was, the popular thing to do at the time and all of that. And now she's disfigured for life. And who knows what other hormone treatments she got. And those are poisons when you're giving something that distorts a child's normal development. Just because the teachers told them it was a good thing to do, and they felt like they were being the teacher's pet for doing it, whatever. These are absolutely evil things. And if we call them anything less, what we're doing is we're actually exposing that child to the real danger. I don't care if they say that it's compassion. It's not compassion, and we can't let them ever take it to that. This is about safety, and the safety is keeping these sick people out of the classroom.
Yes, absolutely. Here in North Carolina and states across the country, you know, a lot of these teachers and principals, all they have to do is point up to the state level and say, well, it's allowed under this policy. It's allowed under this law. Now we have the changes that Biden is pushing in Title IX. Everything, anything and everything is going to be lawful to do in the classroom. So what are we going to do then? What's the argument? What's the next rule? What do we do?
Well, again, it always comes back to calling it out just as you did. Anything is allowable in the classroom. These kids are being endangered. Oh my gosh, you sound paranoid, you sound hysterical. No, I'm calling it out for exactly what it is. You had a post earlier today. I wish I had done a screenshot of it, of an article that talked about charter schools. And it speculated on the possible bigotry that these kids might be taught in these charter schools. Now, we've got kids in government schools being marinated in critical race theory, in attacking so-called white privilege. They're being fed perversion by these teachers. You know, we can go down the list of what's happening at enormous public expense. And in the process, every minute that they spend on all of this really sick, twisted stuff is a minute that they're not learning how to add and subtract and how to be a functional adult. And yet here comes a charter school where these kids are going to get back to basics.
I'm going to put this up. Yeah, let me put this up here because, yeah, you are so right. Look at this.
Would they promote segregation? Okay, so now there's a risk that if you support a charter school, you're not really trying to get your kid educated functionally so he can do reading, writing, arithmetic. You're promoting segregation.
You're a racist. Oh, my God.
There we are, back to that one again.
Yes. Okay, there we go. Just because you don't want to, you know, keep kids hemmed in to a certain school that's failing because of their zip code, that makes you racist. Okay.
Yeah, every step of the way. The number one thing that leftists do in all of these things, and we are guilty of having let it get this far, is they claw their way onto this phony moral high ground. Let's take it back to O'Hare versus the Board of Education, where they got the 10 Commandments out of the public school. Okay, thou shalt not kill. We'd have a lot less mass murderers if kids saw that and believed God would hold them responsible if they violated that. We can, thou shalt not steal. We can go down the list here. Well, we can't have that because schools are supposed to be morally neutral. Well, what we did was we backed off at that point, and under the guise of neutrality now, you have them pushing what this is I call it a countercultural religion. Everything that they're doing here, it's this blind faith in this belief system that has such a horrible track record, and yet they get away with it. And it's because that door was left open. We've got to go back to the basics, and we've got to stick with the basics.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And insisting that the basics be taught that's part of the equation. You're so right, is that, and I'm even guilty of doing this, is pointing out or asking the question, hey, how is presenting pornography to children actually helping to do anything about our exploding illiteracy crisis that we have in this
Well
state all
stated.
across the country?
Well stated. Now, in the cases where they like this picture you put up there, where it's like possible bigotry, in the cases where we start second guessing ourselves, we have just opened that door. We don't have any record anywhere of charter schools actually being hotbeds of bigotry. I guarantee you, if they could find one example in in Tucson, Arizona, where some teacher made a slip up and made something that sounded like a racial joke, that would be headlines, on a daily basis.
They're doing it. Yeah, they're doing it because they're saying school choice is racist.
Mm-hmm. And what happens with school choice, if you actually do the studying on it, is that you have parents of every race lining up for blocks to try and get their kids into those schools that are voucher funded or charter schools and things like that. They want out of the cesspool. Yeah. And so we've got to present it that way. That's what we're dealing with here.
Present it as love.
Yeah. And that's the real love for these kids. And here's the thing, and this kind of goes back to what we talked about with the rhinos. Another one of my rules is once you find out what side people are on, then they have to be indelibly tagged as such. And at that point, you don't allow them to go back a couple of months later, come election time. Yes. You've heard me say before that your worst rhinos at election time, they all suddenly morph into the second coming of Ronald Reagan. And they do that. I mean, I could show you John McCain making these really, really bold border hawk statements in Arizona at election time, and it dissipates into thin air the day after the election. That's where we have a responsibility when we see these people behaving this way to say, no, I'm not going to forget you did that. Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, take your pick. I'm not going to forget you guys did that.
Yeah. I remember when Rush was around, he called him Lindsey Grahamnesty. Remember that?
Yep. Yeah. And Marco Rubio is another one. If I could start naming names, I'm getting emails from Marco Rubio right now, and I know they're not directly coming from him, but I'd love to answer him back and say, yeah, you of that gang of 6 traitors that joined with Obama and Schumer to try and implement amnesty. No, I'm not going to accept the idea that you've seen the light since then.
Yeah. Well, Trump gave us a lot of good ideas for your rules in play. Labeling people is fantastic. It helps them stick. And so guys, labeling this grooming, it drives the left nuts, which is why I love it. And it is applicable. So these rules have been very helpful, Chris, because we are dealing with, as you saw, this issue and more. And so we just have to really, really take it to them. And so we're going to close it up here. But what's the final thing that you can arm us with so that we can do battle against these evil doers, I guess, if we're taking a page out of Bush's nomenclature?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the word grooming, and I'm glad you mentioned the fact that you say it drives him nuts. I have a friend who was a former military man, and he uses the expression that the flak is always heaviest when you're over the target.
Yeah.
And so we don't go into these things just to make them mad. But if you say something and it's true, and they blow a gasket over it, the worst thing you can do is back off at that point, because they're mad because you're nailing it. And we've got to remember that when we engage in these fights. We're not in there to get along. We're not in there to find common ground. We're in there to win, because that's what their goal is. And so you do that and you fight to win.
Yes, absolutely. Look, it is about saving these children. First,
nothing less.
Yeah, I mean, and we have to do that work. So, Chris, always great to have you on. And again, I mean, you're not my sensei for nothing. Great book. Okay. Read it, learn it, live it. Chris, thank you for joining us. This is going to be probably one of many shows we do together during the election season, because we've got to get the best candidates elected all up and down the ballot, which is what our business is here in North Carolina. And so thank you again for helping show us the way.
You're certainly welcome. Thank you for fighting this good fight.
Absolutely.